On March 17, 1947, deputies in rural Boone County, West Virginia, stumbled upon a sealed orphanage ledger hidden behind a false panel in the administrative office of St. Agnes Home for Children. The ledger had been untouched since 1939, bound in cracked leather, and its pages smelled of mildew and wax. According to county records, the girl it chronicled was listed under 7 different paternal surnames before her 10th birthday. The annotations were meticulous, almost obsessive, tiny notes in pencil along the margins that spoke of disappearances, of fleeting foster homes, of disciplinary measures that seemed to echo something older, something beyond the comprehension of ordinary law. Was this the consequence of mental illness, systemic neglect, or a family secret buried for generations? Property deeds from the 1920s describe a brick building with iron-barred windows, though tax ledgers from 1932 list it as vacant. No census record accounted for the girl's presence, yet the ledger meticulously recorded her attendance, her illnesses, her solitary meals in the small iron crib they assigned her. In a 1961 interview with the McDowell Gazette, 83-year-old Lena Hartsfield said, "They never told us her name. They just pointed, and we learned to nod. The staff whispered about the girl, but no one spoke her name above the nursery walls." County Logbook, entry 402A, dated April 9, 1945, reads, "Found girl in white dress, unresponsive. No shoes. No tracks." The entry is unsigned, but the penmanship matches other administrative notes throughout the ledger. The record does not explain where she had come from, only that she had appeared alone on the orphanage steps at dawn, humming fragments of a hymn no one recognized. School records, bound in yellowed paper, confirm her attendance for precisely 2 hours each day before she vanished into the wings of the building. Teachers wrote that she was quiet, oddly knowledgeable about men who had never been seen by the staff, and that she sometimes referred to the names of fathers who were only surnames in ledger margins. Psychiatric files recovered from the West Virginia State Hospital, heavily redacted, include brief references to a female child exhibiting multiple paternal claims. One line reads, "She is not delusional. She is instructive. She names them all. It is known in this county, yet no records corroborate." The same files describe her behavior as methodical, almost ritualistic. She wasn't punished for what she did, she was punished for remembering what they made her watch. Archival photographs show the orphanage courtyard, desolate and overgrown. There are shadows in the corners, children with bowed heads, and in one image, the girl herself, standing alone beneath a skeletal oak tree. The ledger notes beside the image, March 12, 1944. Observed alone. Silent until sundown. Whispered 7 names. 7 fathers. No explanation. 7 men connected to a child whose very existence seemed simultaneously public and forbidden. In the local newspapers of the era, small notices report children leaving and arriving at the orphanage. One clipping from the Beckley Post-Herald, dated May 2, 1946, states, "A child has arrived at St. Agnes Home under unknown guardianship. Identity and parentage remain unverified. Staff report unusual behaviors." Nothing more is recorded. It is as if the press glanced at the situation, nodded politely, and moved on, leaving the ledger to whisper its own truths. The smell of the building, described in a field journal kept by a volunteer in 1948, was not of death. It was of wet wool and milk gone sour. The journal writes, "The way nursery rooms rot when no one sings anymore. The silence builds like dust on shelves, coating the floors, thickening the air. I heard her humming from the attic while all else slept. 7 names in the melody. I dared not listen too closely." County historians discovered that the ledger included notes on visitors. Several local men were recorded as having interactions with the girl. Their names, cross-referenced with property records and jail logs, suggest that at least 3 were legally registered as fathers, while the others appeared only in annotations, with question marks beside their surnames. In some cases, the ledger notes, "Claimed by no one. Claimed by all." A genealogist later remarked, "If you attempt to trace her bloodline, it unravels before your eyes. Every lead leads to absence. Every family tree collapses in on itself." A diary entry from a caretaker, dated November 1946, reads, "They say babies born in that town didn't cry. Not once. Not ever. And if they did, the bells would ring. She arrived silent. She listened to all the men, counted them, remembered each. She is the keeper of what they cannot face." The ledger notes tally her age, her growth, the nights she slept beside windows open to cold air. There is no record of her parents visiting, no photograph beyond the grainy one filed in 1947. Only the girl, the 7 fathers, and the quiet, bureaucratic acknowledgement of her existence. The orphanage remained operational until 1954, yet after the ledger was found in 1947, all other records disappear. Fires in storage rooms are recorded in local newspapers, vaguely attributed to electrical issues, but no investigation followed. Letters to the county superintendent requesting copies of the ledger were returned unopened. Investigators in 1973 noted, property tax ledgers from 1927 still list the Holloway family as active, despite no burial records or census data after 1925. The implication is that families could vanish from all official acknowledgement while still exerting influence over the orphanage, over the girl, over the memories preserved in fragile pencil on brittle paper. Micro-twists in the ledger reveal moral patterns. The girl was disciplined for nothing she did, praised for remembering names she should never have known. Every note carries dual meaning, procedural, administrative, and yet quietly condemning. She learned early, the ledger reads, that silence is safer than speech, that memory is both weapon and chain. She was punished for remembering what they made her watch. In later years, volunteers and visitors to the orphanage described similar experiences. One entry from 1982 recalls, I felt her presence though she was long gone. The nursery smelled of sour milk. Windows rattled without wind. I counted 7 shadows by the fireplace, each one whispering a name I did not recognize. The ledger, when finally archived in the county building, was stored in a room no longer used, its pages encased in plastic, but faint pencil marks remained visible through the plastic, as if the girl had intended them to be read, if someone dared. The internal horror logic of the ledger insists that the girl's knowledge, of fathers, of family secrets, of ritual, was neither imagined nor fictionalized. Each entry, each annotation, functions as evidence, a meticulously preserved map of absence and presence, of memory and erasure. She exists, the ledger implies, in the ledger alone, yet she touches the lives of everyone she names. The town, the families, the men, they all leave traces only she can document. And to this day, in the vicinity of St. Agnes' home, no birds land near the chimney. No matter the season. No matter the wind. The building stands abandoned, windows boarded, paint peeling, yet something about the air carries the weight of the ledger's names. Visitors swear they hear humming at twilight, a child counting fathers. Not 7 fathers, not 6, always 7. 7 men whose identities were hidden from law, memory, and common sense. 7 men whose presence is a riddle, a horror, and a silent accusation. Boone County, West Virginia, stretches like a carved scar across the Appalachian Hills, its valleys folded deep, almost intentionally, to hide the lives that persist there. The roads arrive late, end abruptly, or vanish entirely into coal-stained ridges. According to property maps from 1934, many of the settlements, like Cedar Hollow, McKinley's Ridge, and small clusters of miners' shacks, were never formally incorporated. Mail arrived sporadically. Coal trains dictated the rhythm of life. If a child disappeared, weeks could pass before anyone noticed. Archival photographs from 1940 show soot-blackened rooftops, winding dirt roads, and children walking barefoot to one-room schools. One particularly haunting image depicts a narrow lane flanked by leafless trees, a single figure in the distance carrying a small bundle. Local newspapers described the economic collapse in terse, factual terms. Mine closures leave families without work. Several properties abandoned. Population declining. Yet the subtext of fear and isolation is almost palpable in the photographs. The lean, wary faces, the adult men whose eyes never meet the camera. In field journals maintained by early social workers, the county is described as forgotten by state authorities, yet tightly observed by unseen hands. Volunteer Eliza Kavanaugh, in her 1943 notes, wrote, "The wind whispers through the hollows like someone counting names. Children stare too long. Adults walk past without acknowledgement, but I swear their eyes follow the buildings themselves, not the people." The orphanage was not an anomaly. It existed within a geography built for secrecy, a labyrinth of hills and hollows where rumor traveled faster than mail and truth moved slower than memory. Coal towns were the lifeblood of the county. Kanaha and Logan Creek mines drew families from neighboring states, yet the boom was temporary. By the late 1940s, maps show abandoned structures, some with doors open to the elements, and fields once plowed now returned to forest. Census records from 1940 indicate a population decline of nearly 15% over a decade. Property ledgers list families like the Holloways, the McCrearys, and the Ashcrofts as taxpayers, yet no burial records or further documentation exist beyond the mid-1930s. They appear in the records, but not in life or death, a recurring theme in the county's hidden histories. The geography itself encourages stories that are impossible to verify. Narrow valleys trap sound. Fog rolls in thick, masking movement. In one 1945 survey of Boone County, a WPA cartographer notes, residents of Upper Hollows report hearing children singing at night, but census and school records show no children live there. The air carries both cold dust and something older, intangible, like a memory lingering longer than it should, a secret folded into the land itself. Economic collapse and isolation also shaped social structures. Churches, fraternal lodges, and orphanages became the de facto authority figures, often supplanting state oversight. The ledger discovered at St. Agnes Home notes that children were disciplined according to rules derived from obscure religious manuals, written in hand-copied Bibles that predated the Civil War. County historians have cross-referenced property deeds with these church ledgers, revealing that the orphanage received multiple donations from families whose census records vanished mid-decade. It's as if the county itself conspired to leave gaps in the map, gaps that could hide both children and histories. Maps recovered from the 1950 West Virginia State Survey depict Boone County with several incomplete roads, including a narrow stretch labeled simply never built. Locals in a 1963 interview described it as a road to nowhere, a passage that dead-ended at a cliff before descending into private property. Historians suggest these infrastructural failures were a product of wartime shortages, but oral histories tell a different story. Families whisper that the road was deliberately abandoned to isolate the orphanage, to keep its occupants and secrets confined to the hollows. The sense of otherness extends beyond geography. Regional newspapers occasionally mention strange occurrences: livestock disappearing, unexplained sounds echoing in the valleys, children reporting knowledge of absent adults. A single 1946 clipping in the Beckley Post-Herald notes, residents of Cedar Hollow report that several children speak of fathers unknown to the community. No investigation followed. These reports were sparse, scattered, and ultimately ignored, as if the county's bureaucracies recognized what outsiders could not, that some stories were better left untold. Field notes from a 1948 social worker described the orphanage. Surroundings in precise, unsettling detail. The forest climbs almost to the door. Rain pools in hollows that no drainage reaches. The smell of wet earth and coal lingers. Every sound seems amplified. You feel watched, not by animals, but by something waiting in the trees. The girl in the ledger moves through this terrain as if it belongs to her alone, though she is never seen. This attention to the landscape reflects a larger truth. Boone County is itself a character in the girl's story, its isolation amplifying her anomalies, the silence of its hills a theater for secrets. The county's isolation was compounded by a deliberate suppression of information. Court records show multiple cases dismissed or lost regarding the orphanage, foster care violations, and child welfare inquiries. Fires in storage buildings, logged as accidental in 1952, destroyed key ledgers. In one surviving note, the sheriff's office wrote, "Some files will remain sealed until further notice. Their contents are not for general review." Interviews with former clerks suggest that families who once controlled the mines or the church exerted quiet pressure over local law enforcement to leave the orphanage alone. The county's map is thus not merely geographic, it is administrative, archival, and intentionally incomplete. The landscape itself encourages folklore to flourish. Folktales collected in the 1970s describe spectral children walking the hollows at dusk, counting names aloud, appearing and disappearing in a single valley as if moving between times. One story describes 7 men following a single child through the mist, never speaking, never touching, yet always present. Anthropologists who recorded these tales noted an unsettling pattern. All locations mentioned were within a 10-mile radius of the orphanage, in the same isolated valleys where census records and property deeds left gaps. Even today, Boone County retains an uncanny quality. Satellite maps show old roads that curve sharply, forests reclaiming hollows, and no development encroaching on the orphanage property. Residents recount that fog drifts through the valleys differently here, dense, lingering, almost sentient. Some claim to hear a child's humming when the wind moves through the trees, repeating names no one should remember. The ledger's echoes remain embedded not only in paper but in the land itself, in its isolation, in its deliberate neglect, and in the silence of abandoned streets. The town's history, its geography, its economic collapse, its vanishing families frames the story of the girl with 7 fathers. Boone County was never just a backdrop. It was an accomplice. Its hollows, incomplete roads, and abandoned properties facilitated erasure. Its fog, coal dust, and forested hills concealed behaviors, families, and rituals that no census, court, or social worker could fully document. The county itself becomes an archive, a map of omission, a place where the ledger's horror could not only exist but be preserved, unnoticed by outsiders, enforced by silence, and repeated across generations. The ledger found at St. Agnes' home paints a picture not of a child alone, but of a lineage that vanished into silence. 7 paternal surnames are listed, each accompanied by meticulous notes detailing brief interactions, claims, and absences. Census records from Boone and Logan counties confirm some men lived locally, Holloway, Ashcroft, McCreary, but by 1935, their trails fade. No burial records. No property transfers. No marriages. They appear on maps and tax ledgers, yet nothing anchors them to life or death. It is as though the ledger's child existed to catalog their disappearance, to preserve the names they hoped would be forgotten. Property tax ledgers from 1927 list the Holloway family as active, yet no census after 1925 includes them. Letters found in the Boone County Historical Society archive hint at debt, foreclosures, and disputes over coal leases, but none reference children. The ledger's annotations suggest the girl knew them, recognized them, even though public records indicate she should have been unknown to them. She becomes, in the archival logic of the county, the sole witness to a network of adults erasing themselves while leaving traces in her memory. Missing persons files from 1938 to 1944 show peculiar patterns. A boy named Thomas Ashcroft disappears from a nearby settlement in 1939. A girl named Margaret McCreary vanishes the following year. No official cause is recorded, yet the ledger hints at encounters. Saw Thomas walking past the garden. He did not speak. Eyes wide, unblinking. The child catalogued these absences with an accuracy that unnerved caregivers. They were not errors. They were observations of lives unraveling around her. In 1942, the orphanage social worker Margaret Keene wrote in her field notes, "The girl refers to fathers who are not present, men who do not answer letters. Each name is followed by a story she has heard nowhere but in whispers. I do not know if she is remembering, imagining, or reading secrets hidden in the air." Hand-copied ledgers of the time corroborate these stories. They describe the child reciting details about men she could not have met, the creak of a particular staircase, the smell of coal dust in their homes, the way they folded letters without reading them. These entries are factual, but their content feels like folklore, a record of behaviors observed by none and remembered by one. The ledger also tracks maternal absences. The girl's mother appears only as initials, E.H., care unknown, vanished 1929. School files from 1943 indicate the girl was admitted without documentation. Nurses' notes from 1944 refer repeatedly to a woman of the ledger who leaves instructions in letters, but whose handwriting never matches known samples. Family trees reconstructed from property deeds suggest no living relatives, yet the girl refers to grandparents, uncles, and cousins. The ledger captures her attempts to reconstruct a family that no longer exists, or perhaps never existed as she remembers it. Even the foster families listed in county records are enigmatic. A Mr. and Mrs. Calloway, assigned to her in 1945, reported that the child speaks of fathers I have never known and mothers that are strangers. Social service reports include lines like, "She corrects our recollections. She names things we cannot confirm. She remembers what we have forgotten." In one surviving document, the Calloways note that she identified a grandfather's tombstone buried in a neglected cemetery, a stone recorded as belonging to another family entirely in official records. Archival letters discovered in the 1970s indicate that the child may have been part of a broader practice. One letter, addressed to the Boone County Superintendent in 1948, reads, "We keep the ledger not only for one child but for the town itself. There are others. The girl will speak when she must. She catalogues absence and presence alike. She is the memory we cannot preserve." The phrase "catalogues absence" is repeated in marginal notes, underlined. Historians who reviewed the letters note that they read like directives. The child is simultaneously ward and archivist, punished and preserved, witness and participant. It is in these gaps, the missing records, the vanished families, the unclaimed property, that the ledger's horror intensifies. Families exist on paper yet not in reality. Adults make claims they cannot enforce. Men are recognized by a child who remembers them with precision no one else could. "She learns the world by what is not said, by what disappears before her eyes," wrote social worker Margaret Keene in 1944. And the ledger becomes her map of the invisible. Local newspapers occasionally allude to these gaps. A 1946 Beckley Post-Herald column mentions a child speaking of fathers the town cannot name, and notes that officials dismissed inquiries as superstition. An editorial buried in page 4 comments on the peculiar knowledge of some orphan children, framing it as the natural curiosity of a child raised in isolation. No one in Boone County seems to acknowledge the pattern, though multiple social workers, teachers, and visitors describe the girl's uncanny knowledge. The ledger also hints at deliberate obfuscation. Census anomalies, lost birth records, and inconsistent property deeds suggest coordination or negligence, or perhaps both. The ledger contains shorthand for vanished families, cryptic symbols, and annotations such as Holloway, absent 1925, Ashcroft, active 1927, McCreary, gone before 1930. She names them all. She will not forget. These entries imply that the girl functions as a living ledger herself, preserving memory where the official systems have failed or intentionally erased. Field notes from a 1947 inspection reveal the psychological weight of her awareness. She moves through spaces adults consider empty. She counts names aloud. The room shifts with her presence. Objects appear where they should not be, and yet we cannot account for them. She knows what we have forgotten. The ledger corroborates these observations. Time itself seems to bend around her record keeping. The adults vanish from the narrative, but the girl remembers, methodically, obsessively. One of the more unsettling patterns in the ledger is the repetition of ritual-like behaviors associated with absent fathers. In February 1946, an entry states, 7 fathers visited today in dreams. She notes their shoes, their hair, the scent of coal and tobacco. She corrects their placement in the ledger at dawn. The writing is clinical yet poetic, combining administrative detachment with haunting imagery. It frames the girl's memory as both mechanical and mystical, a bridge between recorded history and lived, unspoken terror. It is perhaps this duality, methodical yet magical, that makes the ledger so compelling. She catalogued not only names but absences, not only relationships but omissions. Where official records failed, she became the town's witness. She knew the Holloways had no heirs, the Ashcrofts had disappeared, and the McCrearys left gaps in every document. In her memory, the ledger, and her observation, life and death, presence and absence, became inseparable, and in these absences, one can trace a peculiar geography. Always the same patterns. Always the same 7 names. The ledger suggests that these rituals were deliberately structured to persist, to outlive memory, to encode knowledge of absent men and hidden lineages into the behavior of children. The ledger, the basement, and the girl's memory together form a terrifying matrix. Each page, each annotation, each carefully recorded observation becomes a record of what adults wish to erase. Fathers unaccounted for, families untraceable, children aware of knowledge they were forbidden to possess. Boone County's isolation, the church's secrecy, and the girl's uncanny recollection created a system that was simultaneously archival, ritualistic, and morally devastating. And in the basement itself, the ledger hints, one could feel the weight of generations. A volunteer writing in 1948 notes, the air presses down. 7 names repeat in the walls. She hums them and the walls answer. You cannot breathe freely. You do not want to leave, but you cannot stay. The girl, the ledger, and the basement together preserve what the county tried to forget, what families attempted to erase, and what official records could never fully acknowledge. Families, property, and institutions all align in hollows, valleys, and abandoned roads. The ledger maps them silently, invisibly, as if the child's memory is intertwined with Boone County itself. She is both product and preserver of its isolation, its disappearances, and its secrets. She is, in effect, the ledger brought to life. The ledger of St. Agnes' home hints at more than missing families. It hints at doctrine, passed quietly through whispers, ledgers, and hand-copied Bibles stored in the church basement. Boone County, with its isolation and abandoned hollows, provided fertile ground for rituals that intertwined faith and control. The ledger notes the girl reciting verses not found in standard scripture, passages copied by caretakers from older, forbidden manuscripts. Mark the 7th father. He will speak without voice. He will arrive when none look. Field journals from the 1940s describe the basement beneath St. Agnes Chapel as cold, damp, and smelling of candle wax long extinguished. Volunteer Eliza Kavanaugh wrote, rows of pews, overturned. Handwritten Bibles stacked in corners. Each verse seems annotated in multiple hands. There is a system, though I do not understand it. The children memorize what adults forbid them to speak aloud. The ledger confirms these observations. The girl could recite hymns and prayers, sometimes inserting the names of the fathers she catalogued. It was never accidental. Diaries recovered from a caretaker named Ruth Carmichael, employed from 1943 to 1948, describe strict, ritualistic patterns of discipline tied to these hidden texts. They are not punished for misbehavior, she writes. They are punished for remembering. They are punished for reading aloud what should remain in silence. These punishments were recorded in meticulous logs, kneeling on stone floors at night, chanting the verses with eyes closed, marking symbols beside their names in the ledger, all while the basement's small windows remain shuttered. The ledger itself contains illustrations, simple, almost childlike, yet precise. 7 triangles forming a circle, a star above a doorway, a line of 7 dots stretching toward a horizon. Marginal notes read, 7 fathers, 7 markers. 1 child will hold all knowledge. She will survive because she remembers. Archival photographs from 1946 show a circle of children seated on the basement floor, their eyes lowered, hands folded, while a caretaker stands with a candle, writing symbols in a notebook. The girl is at the center. No adult besides the caretaker acknowledges her as anything other than a participant in routine, but the ledger's annotations suggest she is the only one truly aware. County records from 1944 to 1947 include references to unusual baptisms and private ceremonies conducted in the church's basement. Names recorded in the ledger correspond to men listed as fathers, though none appear in official birth or marriage records. It is as if the church itself functioned as a parallel bureaucracy, maintaining claims and rituals outside legal scrutiny. A letter discovered in the Boone County Historical Society, written in 1972, reads, "The basement is the archive, the children the clerks, the girl the chief archivist. All else is superficial. All else is for the world to see." The smell of the basement, captured in volunteers' notes, is hauntingly specific: damp earth, candle smoke, and something sweet, like rotting fruit. One entry states, "It is not decay. It is the memory of many years pressing against walls." The girl hums verses, and the air thickens with them. I do not know if it is song or spell. The ledger confirms this auditory obsession. Passages recited multiple times a day, sometimes recorded as annotations in pencil with tiny stars marking emphasis. Beliefs in Boone County were intertwined with oral histories, many of which remain unrecorded. One folklore survey from 1961 notes, "Children of Upper Hollow speak of 7 men who are neither dead nor alive, who guide them through chores, who vanish when adults arrive." The ledger corroborates these claims in a subtle way. The girl often wrote of visits from men who appeared briefly in the basement or at the edge of the playground, interacting with her only in gestures and nods, never in speech. She remembered them, documented them, and occasionally inserted their symbols into prayers. The ledger also includes child punishment logs, detailing nightly lessons, recitations, and isolation periods. On one page, dated September 14, 1945, an entry reads, "She repeated 7 names incorrectly. Correction required. Kneeling at window. Candlelight only. No food until names recited correctly at dawn." Another note reads, "Not punished for misdeeds. Punished for remembering what they must forget." These entries are clinical, yet each word drips with dread. They reveal a system that used doctrine and ritual as tools of control and memory, shaping not only behavior but the very perception of reality. Hand-copied Bibles, still preserved in the Boone County Archive, contain marginalia corresponding to ledger annotations. Verses are underlined, crossed, and sometimes rewritten. "He who counts fathers counts the child," reads one line. 7 shall witness. 1 shall endure. Archival photographs show children following patterns on floors, tracing symbols with chalk, and repeating prayers in voices that volunteers describe as too precise, too old for their years. The girl's participation is always central, her memory organizing the rituals into something larger than herself. Occasionally, the ledger hints at practical lessons disguised as ritual. Instructions on folding sheets, lining shoes, and arranging personal belongings are recorded alongside prayers and verses. One entry, dated March 21, 1946, reads, "She arranges the men's symbols before dawn. 7 triangles. 1 child. 1 record. All must align. Failure is remembered." The fusion of practical order with spiritual instruction blurs the line between obedience and documentation, discipline and archive. Letters to the superintendent from 1948 mention that children sometimes repeated these rituals in dreams, murmuring the names of the 7 fathers while asleep. The ledger notes, "Even when unconscious, she records. Even in dreams, she catalogues absence and presence." Observers, both past and modern, note the unsettling precision of these repetitions. It is as though the child's memory, and the rituals themselves, exist in a liminal space, preserved between waking and sleep, between official oversight and hidden knowledge. The rituals extend beyond the orphanage, infiltrating families in nearby valleys. Cross-reference census data suggests a network of homes where hand-copied verses, secret symbols, and repeated names were taught to children, often under the guise of faith. Social worker logs from 1947 note, other children reference 7 men. Names unknown to their caretakers. The girl appears central to these stories. She is the point through which all memory flows. The ledger frames her as a nexus, a living record in a community that both depends on and fears her recall. Even today, remnants of these rituals persist in Boone County folklore. A 1975 interview with retired schoolteacher Agnes Whitaker recalls, children would hum tunes in patterns. Adults never recognized the words. But we all felt the weight. Something unseen was guiding them. The ledger chronicles a turning point in 1947, a moment when the world beyond Boone County briefly brushed against the hidden horrors of St. Agnes' home. On October 14, 1947, a teacher from a neighboring district, Eleanor Finch, filed a report with the Boone County Board of Education. According to the document, a child, now known in the ledger only as the Seven-Father Girl, entered the classroom, reciting names of men entirely unknown to the local community. The report emphasizes her accuracy, noting that she referred to 7 paternal figures, none of whom were listed in school, church, or municipal records. Newspaper clippings from the Beckley Post-Herald, dated October 16, 1947, confirmed the filing. Local orphan exhibits unusual knowledge of men absent from official records. Child's identity withheld. No investigation authorized. The tone of the article is factual, almost dismissive, but the ledger reveals that Eleanor Finch's report sparked unease among county officials. Social workers were dispatched to St. Agnes' home, yet archival notes indicate that their inquiries were superficial. Files marked confidential in the superintendent's office note, child recounts fathers not recognized by law. Investigation limited by directives from church oversight. Court documents from the period provide additional context. A petition filed by an anonymous concerned citizen references the child's peculiar claims. The child speaks of men she cannot know. She names them accurately. She recounts their appearances, habits, and homes. We fear influence beyond the orphanage. We request review. The petition was dismissed for lack of evidence, though marginal notes in the ledger suggest that the decision was influenced by both local authorities and church officials. The child, the ledger implies, was too precise, too aware, and too tied to patterns no adult could fully understand. Medical files from the Boone County Clinic include an assessment dated November 2, 1947. Dr. Samuel T. Crowley writes, "The child exhibits no signs of intellectual impairment. She is attentive, meticulous, and unusually observant. She names individuals absent from all public records. Standard psychiatric tests fail to account for her knowledge. No logical explanation provided." These files, heavily redacted, correspond with the ledger's entries. The girl's awareness was documented as extraordinary, though the medical establishment avoided interpretation beyond clinical notation. The ledger details additional events from the same period. On October 20, 1947, an unidentified visitor, possibly a distant relative or community figure, arrived at the orphanage. The ledger records, she greets him with 7 names. He denies knowledge. She corrects him. Caretakers intervene. Visitor leaves unsettled. The ambiguity of this entry illustrates the tension between observation and erasure. Adults could neither confirm nor deny the girl's statements, yet the ledger captures them as undeniable fact. School records from 1947 confirm the teacher's unease. Attendance logs note that the child spent most of her day outside the classroom, isolated in the principal's office, repeating names and gestures that staff could not contextualize. Notes from the principal, Clara Hensley, describe the girl as unusually composed for her age. Speaks with certainty of men and events we cannot verify. Maintains a ledger-like memory of interactions, incidents, and absences. Staff instructed not to probe further. The official instruction was clear: observe, record, and leave unchallenged. The ledger also notes the first deaths connected to the girl's awareness, though records are circumstantial. On November 3, 1947, an elderly man surnamed Holloway reportedly fell ill suddenly after visiting the orphanage. The ledger entry reads, "Holloway arrives." She names him. He shivers. Leaves at dusk. Death recorded 2 days later. Connection unconfirmed. Archival death certificates confirm the man's passing, though no cause is indicated beyond natural causes. It is unclear whether this was coincidence, or if the ledger hints at a moral logic, an almost folkloric sense that recognition by the child could bear consequence. Field reports from 1948 describe the community's response. Residents whisper that the child remembers what adults wish to forget. Teachers, clergy, and neighbors began reporting phenomena: children reciting names they could not know, shadows appearing at windows, odd chanting echoing through the hills. Volunteers who visited the orphanage noted that the child sometimes guided them to hidden rooms, to letters, to symbols drawn in chalk on floors and walls. The ledger records these actions in pencil, each note precise: date, observer, and the child's movements. It is both a diary and a catalogue, a map of hidden knowledge. The public, for its part, remained largely unaware. Boone County newspapers maintained a muted tone, reporting incidents with minimal detail. One editorial from December 1947 reads, "There exist children whose knowledge exceeds the ordinary. We recommend observation but not interference. Mysteries of childhood are often ephemeral, and intervention can be harmful." The ledger, however, paints a different picture. The events were neither ephemeral nor innocent. They were systematic, intentional, and bound by ritualized knowledge. One of the most compelling entries involves a school assessment conducted in late November 1947. The teacher, Eleanor Finch, recorded, "She draws 7 figures, labeling each with the name of a father unknown to the school. When questioned, she corrects mistakes with precision. She draws small symbols beside each figure. Patterns repeat across pages. Unclear if art or coded language. Child is calm, cooperative, unnerving." Archival photographs of the drawings survive, revealing a sequence of triangles, lines, and dots that match marginalia in the ledger itself. Scholars who later examined them noted similarities to symbols used in obscure Appalachian folk rituals, suggesting an overlap between institutional observation and folkloric practice. The ledger also details the first media attention, limited though it was. A brief mention in the Charleston Gazette, dated December 12, 1947, reports that a child in Boone County repeats the names of men unknown to teachers, neighbors, or authorities. There is no follow-up story. No interviews. The ledger's annotation next to this clipping reads simply, "Public glimpses truth. Unprepared. Silent again." The child remains central, mediating between knowledge and erasure, and the world outside glimpses only the shadow of what the ledger preserves. Finally, the ledger hints at the child's understanding of her own role. Notes from December 1947 describe her deliberate observation. She watches. She names. She records. She waits. Adults cannot remember. She catalogs. She survives because she observes. The ledger frames this as both survival and moral necessity. The child's awareness, her methodical recollection, and her interaction with outsiders, teachers, visitors, social workers, become a turning point. It is the first documented moment when the outside world recognizes the abnormality, yet remains incapable of comprehending its significance. The ledger hints at witnesses, those who observed the girl with 7 fathers, those who recorded her uncanny knowledge, and then vanished from public record, leaving only fragments of testimony in county archives and field journals. One of the most detailed accounts comes from a teacher, Eleanor Finch, whose 1947 report has been preserved in the Boone County Board of Education files. She described a child who could recite the names, homes, and habits of men absent from any legal or municipal record. Her descriptions, precise and methodical, unsettled administrators who were instructed to observe but not interfere. Eleanor's notes include an entry dated October 28, 1947. She drew 7 triangles on the chalkboard. Each triangle corresponds to a man I cannot identify. She hums names as she draws, correcting my errors with calm authority. The air feels heavy. I cannot leave her presence without her knees. Something is being catalogued, preserved, beyond comprehension. Soon after, Eleanor relocated to Charleston, citing family obligations, though whispers in the ledger suggest that she left in fear. The ledger's annotation reads, "Finch, witness removed. Memory incomplete." Archival asylum files reference another witness, a social worker named Margaret Keene. Assigned to the orphanage in 1943, she maintained detailed journals documenting the girl's behavior, her ritualized memory, and her interactions with visitors. In one 1945 journal entry, Margaret writes, "The girl corrects adults, names men absent from any record. I am unsettled. Staff dismiss my observations as fanciful. I will continue documentation, but my own understanding phrase." Margaret disappears from state employment records in 1949. Letters preserved in the county archives suggest she resigned abruptly, her belongings mailed to a relative, but she left no personal explanation. The ledger's margin notes, keen, witness removed. Unable to reconcile what was seen. A third witness, caretaker Ruth Carmichael, employed from 1943 to 1948, left letters tucked in the orphanage basement, discovered decades later by a local historian. One reads, "I fear the girl knows too much. Each name she whispers carries weight, and I feel it pressing into the walls. We are not observers, we are participants. I do not know if the men are living or remembered, but she knows. And that knowledge, it leaves us unsettled." Ruth relocated to Morgantown in 1949, her papers noting only an address change. Interviews with descendants suggest she never spoke of the orphanage again. The ledger marks her as a witness who departed. Carmichael, witness removed. Left memories behind. Even local residents served as unintentional witnesses. In 1948, volunteer Eliza Kavanaugh wrote, "I saw her in the yard, small hands tracing symbols in the dirt. I counted 7 men in my imagination, though none were present. She hums their names. I am compelled to leave, yet cannot. The child knows more than the town allows. I do not return." Eliza's own records disappear after that year. Boone County historians could not trace her beyond a brief obituary, which lists no children and no explanation for her absence from the region. The ledger notes her entry, Kavanaugh, witness removed. Memory preserved in faint pencil. The ledger's marginalia suggests that witnesses were not always removed voluntarily. On November 12, 1947, a visiting clergy member is recorded as observing the child performing a ritual in the basement. The ledger reads, "Father Harlan enters. Observes. Leaves unsettled. Reports to superiors. No further mention. Presence recorded." Church records do not indicate his reassignment, but letters discovered in diocesan archives hint that he was warned against further investigation. The ledger frames these omissions as deliberate. The girl's memory, and the truth she preserves, are too potent for ordinary adults to reconcile. The child's interactions with these witnesses often created moral and psychological unease. Archival letters from the Boone County Historical Society note that she sometimes guided them to hidden spaces, to marginal notes in old Bibles, and to drawings on the floors of the orphanage basement. One letter, written by an unknown volunteer, states, "She draws the names, 7 men. She observes my hesitation and corrects me. I feel like I am failing a test I never knew existed." Marginal ledger annotations confirm the observation. Witnesses learn only what she allows. Memory is selective. Awareness is dangerous. Even after witnesses left or vanished, their impressions lingered in the record. Newspaper clippings, volunteer journals, and county letters repeatedly reference adults unsettled by a child's knowledge of men no one could verify. In one surviving 1948 report, a school inspector wrote, "Children in Boone County reference fathers the community does not recognize. The girl is central. Adults are bewildered. No action recommended." The ledger annotates this passage. Witnesses see, cannot record fully. The ledger preserves what memory alone cannot. The ledger further details the reactions of those who remained, staff members who tried to enforce normalcy in the orphanage. They describe seeing the child guide other children, correcting their names for absent fathers, and arranging symbols and marks in patterns across walls and floors. Archival photographs capture children sitting in circles, small hands tracing chalked lines, while caretakers hover silently, uncertain whether to intervene. The ledger frames these moments with precision. Adults hesitate. They watch. She corrects. They leave unsettled. The knowledge endures. Some witnesses left physical traces. A field journal from 1947 notes, "I smelled candle smoke on my clothes weeks after leaving. I cannot account for it." The girl's presence lingers in air, in memory. She is not merely observed, she observes, and the weight follows. Marginalia in the ledger confirms that observers often internalize the child's knowledge, though most did not survive in Boone County's records beyond a few years. The ledger itself becomes the repository for both the child's memory and the lingering impressions of those who encountered it. The ledger also hints at the dangers of witnessing too closely. One entry, dated December 3, 1947, records, "Volunteer notes dizziness, loss of appetite after observing 7-name recitation. Leaves in haste. Cannot return." Memory of observation preserved in ledger. These subtle effects suggest that proximity to the child's catalogue of fathers, symbols, and rituals carried consequences, psychological, emotional, or perhaps more arcane. Boone County folklore collected decades later references similar phenomena, adults feeling drained, anxious, or compelled to leave after observing children engaged in unfamiliar rites. By 1948, the ledger reveals, the girl had become central to a network of silent witnesses. Teachers, caretakers, volunteers, and clergy all observed her, recorded their impressions, and eventually disappeared from the public record or left Boone County entirely. Their testimonies survive only in fragments, field journals, letters, newspaper clippings, and marginal ledger annotations, yet these fragments confirm the pattern. Anyone who engaged deeply with the child risked erasure, removal, or displacement. The ledger itself records this process almost clinically. Witnesses see. Witnesses leave. Names recorded. Knowledge endures. The girl observes and preserves. In doing so, the ledger functions as both archive and warning, preserving memory when human witnesses cannot remain. The girl, its central figure, exists simultaneously as participant and archivist, as observer and observed. She mediates between knowledge and erasure, recording the unseen, correcting the incomplete, cataloging absence, and leaving those who encounter her unsettled, removed, or erased from the record entirely. By late 1947, the ledger reveals a troubling pattern. The girl's knowledge, her catalog of absent fathers, and her ritualized behaviors were no longer merely curiosities. They were threats to the carefully maintained facades of Boone County. Reports from teachers, social workers, and volunteers were systematically ignored, altered, or destroyed. County records note fires in storage facilities, missing court documents, and letters marked confidential, do not release. The ledger captures these omissions with quiet precision, files removed. Observers silenced. Knowledge preserved by the child alone. Official correspondence between the county superintendent and the church hierarchy provides a glimpse into the mechanisms of suppression. A letter dated November 10, 1947, reads, "The child exhibits awareness beyond oversight. Investigation should be limited. Staff must not pursue further inquiry. Records must remain sealed. Intervention by external authorities is discouraged." Marginal annotations in the ledger indicate that these directives were obeyed. Observers, whether they were teachers, social workers, or visiting volunteers, were discouraged from reporting anomalies publicly. The ledger notes, witnesses warned. Those who disobey depart. Court records also reflect erasure. A petition filed by an anonymous concerned citizen in October 1947 requested investigation into the orphanage's unusual practices. By December, the case was dismissed with minimal explanation. Marginal ledger entries read, petition removed. Memory remains. Officials acquiesce. Adults blind to patterns. Legal historians later observed that several files related to foster care, child welfare, and minor abuse cases in Boone County were missing or burned between 1947 and 1950. The ledger suggests that these incidents were not accidental, records erased. Knowledge contained by one child. Even media coverage was curtailed. Archival newspapers include brief mentions of the girl's unusual behavior, yet follow-up stories never appeared. One clipping from the Charleston Gazette, dated December 12, 1947, reads, "Orphan exhibits knowledge of men absent from municipal records. Teachers report but do not elaborate. Investigation recommended but not pursued." The ledger annotates, public glimpses truth. No consequences. Silence enforced. Journalists who attempted further inquiry encountered roadblocks, with letters returned, sources unavailable, or archives inaccessible. Boone County's isolation amplified this suppression, shielding the orphanage from scrutiny while the ledger quietly recorded events. Field journals from volunteers provide further evidence. Eliza Kavanaugh's 1948 notes describe the sudden disappearance of her colleagues. 2 staff members left abruptly. Files missing. I am told not to ask. Letters returned unopened. I fear my memory is the only record remaining. The ledger captures this tension. Witnesses removed. Observation continues. Child remains central. By centralizing memory within the girl, the ledger depicts suppression as both administrative and psychological, ensuring that only she retained awareness of the truth. Religious oversight also played a significant role. Correspondence between church officials and local authorities emphasizes containment rather than intervention. Do not allow external auditors. Maintain internal records. Child's knowledge should be respected but not encouraged to disrupt normal operations. Archival letters indicate that caretakers were instructed to correct deviations from ritual, reinforcing obedience while discouraging disclosure. Marginal ledger annotations underscore the child's awareness of these dynamics. She observes compliance. She notes absence. She catalogs all. Fires in archival storage facilities are documented in county property records. One incident, dated February 3, 1948, destroyed the original ledger of foster care reports, juvenile case files, and several correspondence logs. An official report lists the cause as accidental, though the ledger implies otherwise. Files removed. Smoke ascends. Observers unable to record. Child's memory endures. The implication is clear. The town's erasure of inconvenient truths was deliberate, coordinated, and effective. Boone County's history, preserved only in fragments, remained incomplete outside the ledger's pages. Even casual witnesses were absorbed into the system of suppression. Teachers who attempted to document anomalies were reassigned, volunteers who questioned authority were discouraged or removed, and neighbors who noticed unusual events were instructed to remain silent. A letter from a 1948 social worker reads, "Adults advised not to discuss children's accounts. Public awareness is unnecessary. Focus on routine care. Do not pursue further observation." The ledger confirms, witnesses see. Witnesses leave. Knowledge remains with the child. Archival diaries reveal a psychological dimension to suppression. Caretakers noted that the child sometimes corrected their recollections, reminding adults of facts they wished to forget. This unsettling precision created anxiety, fear, and compliance. Field notes from Margaret Keene, dated November 1947, describe, "She names men I cannot remember. I feel complicit, watching without intervention. Others are removed. I am left unsettled." The ledger annotates these entries. Witnesses falter. Control enforced. Memory centralized. The ledger also hints at the town's broader social complicity. Families whose names appear in the girls' records were occasionally cited in correspondence with church officials, with instructions to maintain distance or refrain from interference. Marginal notes emphasize that adults were aware of patterns but lacked power, or will, to intervene. Archival letters reference quiet observation and restricted disclosure, implying that suppression extended beyond the orphanage, encompassing the wider community. Boone County itself functioned as a mechanism for containment. Even after official suppression ended, or appeared to end, the effects lingered. Interviews conducted in the 1960s with former staff reveal anxiety, selective memory, and an unwillingness to discuss the girl or her ledger. One former caretaker wrote, "We saw what we were not meant to see. We spoke too much once. Never again." Archival notes in the ledger describe these lingering effects. Witnesses altered. Memory contained. Child central. Patterns endure. The ledger frames suppression as not only institutional but almost supernatural in scope, a process that ensured erasure while preserving a single repository of knowledge, the girl herself. The ledger's annotations reveal the deliberate coordination between church, county, and social structures. Files destroyed. Letters burned. Witnesses removed. Child remains. Records incomplete. Knowledge centralized. By embedding her memory as the central record, the town effectively silenced adults while maintaining the illusion of order. Boone County's suppression was comprehensive, legal, administrative, social, and psychological, preserving a delicate veneer of normalcy while the ledger continued to document anomalies, connections, and absences. Even decades later, the suppression leaves traces. Fires, missing files, and redacted letters continue to obstruct historical research. Oral histories hint at events never officially recorded. Field surveys from the 1970s describe the lingering effect of fear. Adults who experience the orphanage rarely speak of it, and those who attempt archival work encounter dead ends. The ledger persists as the sole document capable of capturing what official records sought to erase: patterns, rituals, absences, and the child who observed it all. Amid Boone County's hollows, the ledger points to a structure that persists even decades later: a weathered, timber-framed house perched on a rise above the valley, privately owned but spoken of in whispers. Archival property deeds from 1923 to 1950 list the building under multiple surnames: Holloway, Ashcroft, McCreary, but each owner disappears abruptly from the record. By 1947, the ledger notes, the child spent long hours observing the house from a distance, sketching its windows, doors, and chimneys with uncanny precision. The house watches back, the ledger annotates, as if it knows the name she calls aloud. Photographs from a volunteer survey in 1987 show the structure, gray and decaying, its windows darkened by years of soot and neglect. The ledger includes a note about the survey: observer enters. Returns changed. Mentions shadows, names, and walls moving without wind. Local folklore collected at the time recalls that anyone who stayed past sunset felt a weight pressing into the floors, heard whispers in voices both adult and child, and smelled the distinct aroma of damp coal mixed with old wood and candle smoke. Volunteers referred to it only as the Seven Father House, though no map marked it officially. Field journals from 1999 describe a teenager trespassing on the property. She came out pale, the notes read, speaking of names no one else knew. Claimed the house remembered, and that it whispered directions. Nothing else seemed altered, yet her eyes told stories no one should see. Archival commentary in the ledger confirms, entry recorded. Observer altered. House remains. Names persist. The house's presence is uncanny, not in its structure, but in the way it seems to interact with those who enter, responding to knowledge only the girl, and her descendants, the ledger implies, could access. Even in 2006, property surveys note the building's endurance. Boone County zoning files describe it as vacant, privately owned, structurally unsound, yet the ledger contains observations of late-night light moving in upper windows, sounds of murmured names, and shadows crossing spaces with no living inhabitants recorded. One entry reads, "No one lives here. No one has." Still, walls repeat patterns she marked decades ago. Doors aligned to 7 points. Symbols persist. House remembers. Volunteers and trespassers alike report an atmosphere of intense attention, as though the building itself catalogued those who passed through. Archival interviews with descendants of the caretakers note that the house was central to the rituals described in earlier sections. A granddaughter of Ruth Carmichael recalled, the adults spoke of it as a place of observation. They whispered about basements, names, and candles. The girl, they said, could enter and see what no adult could. I never understood, but they feared it. The ledger corroborates, house as witness, house as record, child as medium. Adults fear memory it contains. Reports indicate that the building was never renovated substantially after the 1940s. Tax records from 1955 list the property with minimal valuation due to disrepair, yet no demolition permits exist. Observers in the 1970s note that windows were broken but not replaced, chimneys cracked but not removed, and the wooden floors warped in patterns aligning with the symbols the ledger preserves. Volunteers writing field notes in 1987 mentioned that the house seems to shift subtly when unobserved. Shadows stretch unnaturally, floorboards creak in response to invisible steps, and a faint, repetitive sound of humming names lingers. The ledger also records attempts to interact with the house. On October 12, 1987, a field volunteer wrote, "We enter cautiously. Symbols of chalk on floors, faint but present. Child not present. Names written in dust. I feel her observation as if pressing into my skin. I leave abruptly." Marginal notes emphasize that the house does not merely exist, it functions as a repository, extending the child's memory into space itself. Boone County folklore reinforces this perception. Adults who approach it speak of a sense of being watched, of knowing that unseen eyes catalog every step. Even casual encounters with the property carry consequences. A journalist visiting in 1999 described feeling disoriented, noting, "The layout shifts in my perception. Stairs lead to nothing. Rooms rearranged. Doors appear and vanish. Names echo faintly. I cannot reconcile memory with observation." The ledger comments, "Memory of child extends. House enforces recollection. Witnesses altered. Patterns endure." The building becomes not only a physical space but a mnemonic device, storing decades of observation, ritual, and suppressed knowledge. Archival photographs from 2006 illustrate the house's isolation. Fog rolls down the valley, blanketing the foundations in gray light. The ledger annotates, "Distance protects memory. House stands silent. Symbols unbroken. Names endure." Volunteers' reports emphasize the same. No birds land near the chimney. No wind seems to disturb the dust settled on the floorboards. It is as if the house itself maintains the ledger's record, waiting for those attuned to the girl's catalog of absent fathers to perceive it. Even Boone County's official surveys note its presence as unusual. Zoning inspectors report structurally unsound, hazardous, uninhabited yet leave the property untouched. Ledger annotations clarify, house must remain. Observation continues. Memory cannot be destroyed. Walls speak for her. The structure's endurance defies rational explanation. It is less a home than a vessel, a spatial ledger preserving the child's knowledge and the traces of those who witnessed it. The ledger further emphasizes the connection between the child and the house. She enters, observes, catalogs. House echoes names. Walls hum. Visitors altered. Patterns persist. In this way, the building is inseparable from the child's memory and the ledger's record. It is both witness and participant, repository and archive, haunting structure and ritualized space. By the early 2000s, stories of the house circulated quietly among local historians and folklore enthusiasts. One 2004 field note describes a trespasser who returned from the house shaking, insisting that it spoke to me, not with words but with names, and it remembered things I never knew. Archival marginalia in the ledger emphasize the continuity. The house remembers because she remembered. Patterns endure. Observers altered. Memory persists in wood, dust, and shadow. Even today, the ledger suggests, the house remains an active participant in the cycle of observation and memory. Anyone who approaches is recorded in its spatial memory, as if the building itself preserves the rituals, names, and sequences established decades prior. The ledger annotates, house stands. Child observed. Names endure. Adults fear knowledge contained. Boone County remembers quietly. The ledger, while centered on the girl in the house, hints at a wider network, families in surrounding hollows who practiced similar rituals, observed similar patterns, and encoded knowledge through generations. Archival census data from Boone and Logan counties shows clusters of surnames repeating in orphanage and school records. Holloway, Ashcroft, McCreary, and Crowley appear consistently, often with children catalogued in ways similar to the girl. Yet many adults vanish from property deeds, death certificates, and municipal files, leaving gaps the ledger attempts to reconcile. Field surveys conducted in the 1950s, preserved in volunteer journals, described small households in remote hollows where children would trace symbols on floors and walls. A 1954 survey entry notes, observed a girl, roughly the same age as our central subject, drawing triangles and circles in dust while reciting names. Adults nearby silent. Repetition of 7 names noted. Ritual mirrors St. Agnes ledger exactly. Marginal annotations suggest that the practices were transmitted orally, from one hidden family to another, and the girl's memory serves as a central reference point. School records reinforce this pattern. Attendance logs from McDowell and Logan districts in 1948 to 1952 occasionally list children referencing unknown men, correcting teachers, and repeating symbols associated with St. Agnes basement. One 1949 entry reads, child recites names of men not listed in county records. Draws corresponding symbols. Teacher confused. Child calm, deliberate. Other students follow without prompting. The ledger's marginalia notes, pattern emerges. 7 names replicated. Knowledge spread subtly. Adults unaware. Oral histories collected in the 1960s and 1970s emphasize this recurrence. Retired schoolteacher Agnes Whitaker recalled, children from upper hollows would hum certain tunes, repeating words I could not understand. Some claimed to know men who didn't exist. Others mentioned numbers, shapes, patterns. Always 7. Always central. I dismissed it at the time, but looking back, I see the repetition. The girl in Boone County is not unique, she is a node. The ledger annotates, node identified. Memory centralized. Patterns extend beyond initial observation. Legal records provide further evidence of repetition. Juvenile court files from neighboring counties occasionally reference children with unusually detailed knowledge of absent adults. One case from 1951 involves a girl in Logan County who described 7 men, none of whom appeared in census or municipal records. The ledger comments, analogous record. Memory mirrors St. Agnes. Patterns reinforced. Adults powerless to interpret. Such duplications suggest a ritualistic logic underpinning the community's hidden network, binding children across hollows to an enduring set of practices. Property records also reveal alignment with the ledger's annotations. Houses in remote hollows, often abandoned or repurposed, retain floor patterns, symbols on walls, and architectural quirks that mirror those of the central house in Boone County. Field notes from 1963 describe chalk triangles in living rooms. Triangular alignments of hearths and doors. Patterns correspond with ledger drawings. Observers report unease. Children seen tracing symbols in secret. The ledger notes, structures mirror memory. Architecture encodes ritual. Families replicate unknowingly, deliberately, or both. Even regional newspapers hint at broader repetition. Articles in the Beckley Post-Herald from 1949 to 1953 mention children in multiple towns recounting unknown fathers, drawing symbols, or reciting sequences that baffled teachers. One report reads, several children in Logan and Boone counties reference men absent from any municipal record. Schools cannot reconcile accounts. Parents reluctant to discuss. Experts called for observation only. The ledger annotates, knowledge not isolated. Adults see only fragments. Memory persists. Field journals from volunteers reveal patterns in behavior that extend across families. One 1956 note describes a group of children in a Logan County home. Girls and boys chant sequences of 7 names while tracing symbols on floors. When challenged, they correct each other. Adults intervene minimally. Patterns persist. Central girl's legacy observable. Marginal annotations in the ledger highlight the replication of ritual, emphasizing continuity over geography. 7 names. Triangles. Children central. Knowledge persists across valleys. Even folklore collected in oral surveys suggests continuity. Residents whispered of families who do not forget, and children who remember what adults erase. One 1971 interview with a local coal miner recalls, babies born in the upper hollows would hum songs their parents never taught them. Names of men who had been gone for decades. Symbols traced in dust. Everyone ignored it, afraid of drawing attention. The ledger's marginalia confirms the connection. Folk memory aligns with ledger. Patterns systemic. Observation central. Archival photographs provide subtle evidence as well. One 1952 photograph, recently discovered in a private collection, shows 3 children in a cabin in Logan County, chalking symbols on the floor while a caretaker writes marginal annotations in a ledger. The symbols correspond almost exactly to those in St. Agnes ledger. Marginal notes read, replication confirmed. Pattern consistent. Adults unaware of underlying logic. Memory preserved by children. The ledger frames this as a spatial and temporal extension of the central ritual. Repetition is not accidental, it is structural. The ledger also details attempts by adults to suppress these patterns, echoing the suppression in Boone County. Letters from church authorities, school administrators, and local social workers instruct that anomalies should not be reported or investigated. Field notes describe volunteers who attempted documentation being redirected, threatened, or subtly warned to leave the hollows. The ledger annotates, adults cannot interfere. Knowledge centralizes. Children continue ritual unobserved. This dual process of replication and suppression ensures both continuity and invisibility. Even decades later, patterns emerge in unexpected ways. Reports in the 1980s and 1990s describe children drawing sequences of symbols, humming untraceable tunes, and referencing men unknown to official records. Modern volunteers note that these patterns echo those of St. Agnes ledger. Field notes from 1997 describe a child in McDowell County. 7 names, 7 symbols, repeated without guidance. Adults watch, uncertain. She corrects errors without speaking. Patterns persist. History repeats quietly. The ledger annotates, replication across generations. Observation continues. Memory survives despite adults' attempts at erasure. By collating census data, school records, field notes, oral histories, and archival photographs, the ledger illustrates a systemic phenomenon. The child in Boone County is one node within a larger network of families and children who preserve hidden knowledge. Ritual, memory, and observation persist beyond geography, enforced by repetition, spatial encoding, and the careful documentation of the girl and her peers. Adults may attempt suppression, but the ledger demonstrates the futility of erasure. Patterns endure, replicated by children who inherit both ritual and memory, often unknowingly. The ledger concludes this section with a chilling annotation: 7 names. 7 families. 7 patterns. Children remember what adults erase. The girl's knowledge anchors the system. Observers altered. Memory persists. Patterns endure. Decades after the original ledger ceased active observation, Boone and Logan counties witnessed echoes of the same phenomenon. Modern reports, beginning in the late 1990s, reveal children exhibiting behaviors identical to those recorded in the 1947 to 1953 records. Local police logs, school disciplinary files, and social media posts indicate that the patterns observed in St. Agnes Orphanage were not confined to history. They were re-emerging, subtle, and deliberate. One early instance is recorded in a 1998 police report from McDowell County. Officers responding to a call about a minor trespass at an abandoned property observed a child tracing symbols in the dust on the floor of a collapsed home. The report reads, "Child appears to recite names not known to family or neighbors. Symbols replicate patterns described in archival records." No further witnesses. No parents present. Child calm and precise. Field notes, later cross-referenced with archival ledger annotations, confirmed that the sequence and structure mirrored the original 7 name patterns. School records from 2002 onward highlight the phenomenon within educational spaces. Teachers documented children drawing triangles, circles, and symbols resembling those described in the ledger, often alongside lists of names absent from official family records. In one McDowell Elementary log from 2004, a first-grade teacher writes, "Child names 7 men we cannot identify. Draws corresponding symbols on notebook. Other students replicate without prompting. We cannot trace men in any municipal record. Behavior dismissed as imagination, yet unnerving." Marginal notes in archived copies of the log echo the ledger's language. Pattern resurfaces. Knowledge persists. Adults unable to intervene. Social media and local forums provide new insight into contemporary repetition. Posts from 2010 to 2015 describe children posting symbols online, sometimes paired with cryptic comments such as "they see what you forget" or "the names are all here." While anonymity obscures identities, local folklore enthusiasts trace the accounts to families long associated with the original ledger's surnames. Archival commentary within the ledger suggests continuity. Names endure. Patterns replicate. Child nodes appear in modern networks. Adults unaware. Police logs also indicate repeated reports of auditory phenomena. In 2008, a mother in Logan County contacted authorities after her daughter repeatedly hummed a tune reportedly connected to 7 unknown men. The officer's field note reads, "Child maintains composure. Mentions names unknown to family or school. No signs of external coercion. Child references symbols drawn on walls, unseen by adults. Behavior consistent with historical observations in Boone County." The ledger annotation confirms the connection. Memory resurfaces. Observation continues. Patterns persist. Even digital records reveal replication. An email uncovered in 2014 by a local historian contains photographs of floor symbols and lists of names, accompanied by the caption, "Found at abandoned property." Mirrors ledger precisely. The email sender is a descendant of the original caretaker lineage, though the sender's identity remains partially redacted. The ledger comments, "Child's memory and descendant network sustain patterns. Observation continuous. Adults misinterpret. Knowledge preserved." Field surveys conducted in 2016 noted children performing ritualized behaviors in abandoned cabins and schoolyards. Volunteers report, 7 names written in dust. Triangular and circular arrangements of symbols. Children hum in sequence. Repetition precise. Adults nearby unaware or unable to intervene. These observations correlate directly with the original ledger, implying that the girl's knowledge was encoded into the cultural memory of Boone County and persisted across generations. Marginal ledger annotations read, "Patterns resurface. Memory anchors behavior. Adults blind to continuity." Contemporary folklore mirrors historical accounts. Residents report hearing unusual chants, whispered names, and repetitive humming in abandoned hollows. One field note from 2018 reads, "Children sketch symbols in abandoned homes. Claim to see men we were told not to remember." Local adults avoid conversation. Fear persists. The ledger confirms, oral memory preserves. Children inherit patterns. Adults erase. Cycle repeats. Archival comparisons reveal a striking consistency. Symbols drawn in 1947 to 1953 ledgers match 2002 to 2018 field photographs and classroom observations. The shapes, triangles, circles, and intersecting lines appear alongside lists of 7 names. Behavior mirrors that of the central girl, with children correcting each other, replicating sequences, and appearing both calm and deliberately aware. The ledger annotates, patterns identical. Nodes appear. Memory persists despite temporal gaps. Adults remain unaware. Modern digital communications indicate another layer of replication. A 2015 post on a local Facebook group referenced a child drawing 7 symbols and naming 7 men, captioned simply, "They see us." The post was removed shortly after publication. Archived copies correlate directly with ledger annotations. Observation extends into modern networks. Memory encoded digitally. Adults unable to preserve or suppress. Patterns persist. Even law enforcement encounters reflect the resurgence. In 2017, a Boone County officer responding to a report of children drawing on abandoned property noted, 7 names listed. Symbols consistent with historical patterns. Child spoke of men absent from official records. Adult intervention limited. Behavior precise, ritualistic. Echoes historical ledger. The ledger confirms, memory endures. Observation continues. Nodes replicate. The ledger emphasizes the cyclical nature of this recurrence. Each re-emergence is framed as both a continuation and a warning. Marginal annotations read, patterns never ceased. Adults attempted suppression. Memory survived through child nodes. Knowledge persists. Ritual continues. Observation unbroken. These entries suggest that Boone County itself functions as a repository, its geography, architecture, and families reinforcing the persistence of the girls' cataloged knowledge. Even modern behavioral psychologists consulted in 2018 recognized the anomalous nature of the phenomenon. A report notes, observed children exhibit knowledge and ritual behaviors unaccountable by conventional familial or educational structures. Patterns correspond precisely with archival data from 1947 to 1953. Standard explanations insufficient. The ledger annotation frames this with a quiet horror. Science observes but does not understand. Memory persists. Patterns endure. The ledger concludes this section with a chilling observation, 7 names. Patterns reappear. Children replicate what adults erase. Memory flows from past to present. Observation continues. Adults powerless. Boone County breathes the ledger. In this way, the return is not merely repetition, it is a system reasserting itself, a network of knowledge encoded into children, structures, and geography. Even today, volunteers, teachers, and parents report subtle traces, children humming unfamiliar tunes, tracing symbols in dust, and listing names absent from municipal records. Field notes describe repeated behavior precisely aligned with the ledger. 7 names, 7 symbols, 7 nodes. Adults blind. Memory persists. The ledger frames this return as inevitable, systemic, and uncontainable. Knowledge, once recorded by the girl, has spread across time, space, and generations, quietly reasserting itself in modern Boone and Logan counties. Throughout the ledger, one detail emerges with increasing insistence, a single name, recurring across decades, locations, and media. It appears in orphanage logs, school attendance sheets, church correspondence, property deeds, and marginalia. Though its spelling varies slightly, Ashcroft, 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 the ledger emphasizes that this is no typographical error. The name carries weight, acting as a locus of memory and influence, a key through which all other patterns and rituals converge. Archival documents suggest that the girl's own utterance of the name carried profound consequences. A 1947 orphanage field note states, she whispers Ashcroft 7 times. Staff shiver. Children correct each other. The air grows heavy. Doors creak though wind is absent. Adults uneasy. Later margin notes in the ledger explain, names spoken. Patterns shift. Observers altered. House trembles subtly. Memory asserts dominance. The ledger frames the name not simply as a person but as a fulcrum, capable of rewriting perception, altering memory, and organizing the hidden network of children and families. Court records provide further illustration. In 1951, a petition filed in Logan County references a child listing men unknown to records. Handwritten additions in the ledger highlight, one name repeated in every account, Ashcroft. Variations across decades. Adults fail to reconcile. Memory persists. Officials appear to have noted the recurrence but treated it as coincidence or clerical confusion. The ledger's annotation is more precise. Coincidence does not exist here. Patterns deliberate. Observation central. Memory enforced through utterance. Even property records echo the name's persistence. Multiple deeds in Boone County list Ashcroft descendants owning, abandoning, or leasing property without continuity in civil registries. The ledger observes, ownership exists, then vanishes, then reappears. Name anchors families, rituals, and structures. Adults observe but cannot intervene. Patterns endure. Field surveys in 1973 and 1987 confirmed that houses associated with Ashcroft families bear symbols and alignments identical to those in St. Agnes ledger, suggesting a spatial encoding of memory linked directly to the name. Oral histories emphasize the social weight of the name. Residents recalled whispered warnings, "Don't speak Ashcroft aloud, and the house will remember if you say it wrong." Archival interviews, preserved in County Historical Society files, record similar admonitions. One interview with a 1975 volunteer notes, children would look at each other when the name was mentioned. Adults seemed to shrink back. Something about the name carried authority, even fear. Patterns coalesced when it was uttered. The ledger annotates, name organizes knowledge. Memory concentrates. Adults falter. In the late 1980s, field surveys observed descendants of the original orphanage interacting with symbols, repeating sequences, and invoking the name. Volunteers' notes describe children tracing letters in dust, whispering Ashcroft repeatedly, and aligning their movements with floor patterns that match decades-old diagrams. The ledger explains, name anchors nodes. Children repeat sequences. Adults witness but fail to grasp logic. Memory consolidates. Ritual persists. Digital records from the early 2000s suggest the name continues to influence behavior. Social media posts, forums, and personal blogs recount children drawing symbols or referencing men unknown to their families, invariably including a variation of Ashcroft. One archived post from 2012 reads, "She drew the triangles and wrote Ashcroft 7 times. No one else knew the names. I left unsettled." The ledger's marginal note reads, "Pattern confirmed. Nodes replicate. Memory persists. Adults unaware." Even in police logs, the name reappears. A 2015 field report in McDowell County details a child trespassing in an abandoned cabin, drawing symbols while reciting names. 7 names, 1 recurring, Ashcroft. Child corrects officer's pronunciation. Symbols replicate patterns from historical records. Observer unnerved. Ledger annotations confirm, name spoken. Records shift. Observation continues. Patterns anchor themselves to Ashcroft. The ledger further suggests that the name functions as a key to memory itself. When children or descendants speak it aloud, spaces, symbols, and sequences align. Rooms seem to react. Observers report psychological unease. Field notes from 2016 describe, the moment Ashcroft was whispered, floorboards seemed to hum. Triangles aligned. Air thickened. Observer recollections fractured. Memory extended beyond the child. Marginal notes emphasize the systemic nature, name central. Patterns activated. Memory persists. Nodes synchronize. Even historical letters emphasize the potency of Ashcroft. A 1948 note from a caretaker reads, "She whispered Ashcroft and the other children repeated. I did not understand the weight. The room became heavy. Names persisted. Adults dared not speak." The ledger annotates, memory is concentrated. Ritual activated. Observation extends. Name carries authority over continuity. The ledger also documents attempts to erase or suppress the name. Fires, redactions, and missing files coincide with moments when the name appears. One marginal annotation states, "Files removed." Name persists. Children continue sequences. Adults powerless. Memory persists. Yet the name re-emerges, repeating through each generation, linking children, houses, and rituals across time. Boone County itself seems to preserve it, as if the terrain remembers what adults sought to obliterate. Even modern educators and psychologists, unaware of the ledger, have noted the name's recurrence. A 2018 report describes children drawing 7 symbols, reciting 7 names, with one consistently unfamiliar, Ashcroft. The report remarks, pattern mirrors historical accounts in multiple counties. Conventional explanation insufficient. The ledger annotates, pattern enduring. Nodes synchronize. Memory preserved. Adults fail to reconcile. The ledger frames Ashcroft as both anchor and agent, a name that centralizes observation, preserves ritual, and coordinates the network of children and memory across decades. It functions as a locus of continuity, a key through which all other patterns, triangles, circles, sequences of 7, align. The ledger notes, Ashcroft. Spoken, written, traced, remembered. Memory persists. Observation continues. Children anchor history. Adults falter. By the early 2020s, even casual field observations and social media accounts continued to show children interacting with symbols and repeating the name. The ledger emphasizes that the name's persistence is inevitable, its power unbroken. 7 names, 1 central. Ashcroft endures. Patterns anchor themselves in children, houses, and memory. Observation continues. Memory asserts itself. The ledger concludes section 11 with a chilling observation. Speak it, and records shift. Trace it, and walls respond. Whisper it, and nodes synchronize. Ashcroft is the key. Memory persists. Observation continues. Adults fail. Patterns endure. By the 2020s, Boone and Logan counties retained the lingering presence of everything recorded in St. Agnes ledger. Houses, children, symbols, and the recurring name converge across time, a system neither fully understood nor entirely observable by adults. Field reports from as recently as 2023 describe children tracing triangles, reciting 7 names, and whispering Ashcroft in abandoned cabins or forest clearings. The ledger annotates, memory persists. Observation continues. Adults witness fragments only. Nodes replicate. A GPS survey of abandoned properties indicates that each site corresponds roughly to older deeds associated with Holloway, Ashcroft, McCreary, and Crowley. Volunteers describe the sensation of walking through the spaces. Floorboards creak even without pressure, dust shifts into deliberate patterns, and air thickens as if attuned to the presence of memory. Marginal ledger notes read, space records patterns. Observation persists. Child node central. Adults fail to perceive continuity. Even digital footprints contribute to this haunting. Videos, photographs, and social media posts capture children drawing symbols, writing lists of names, or humming sequences reminiscent of the ledger's original entries. One archived post from 2021 shows a child standing in a derelict cabin, chalking a circle on the floor while whispering Ashcroft repeatedly. The annotation in the ledger reads, "Memory extends into virtual space. Observation uninterrupted. Adults cannot suppress. Patterns endure." Local historians attempting to document these occurrences encounter obstructions similar to those described in Section 7. Files are missing, volunteers suddenly unavailable, and archival correspondence redacted. A 2019 survey notes, several county offices returned requests with no explanation. Newspaper archives incomplete. Personal files destroyed or withheld. The ledger comments, suppression persists across generations. Memory concentrated in children and nodes. Adults powerless. Field journals record the psychological and sensory impact of these spaces. One 2022 volunteer writes, "The smell wasn't of decay but of wet wool and milk gone sour, the way nursery rooms rot when no one sings anymore. Floorboards hum under your feet. Dust lifts in patterns, seemingly orchestrated by unseen hands. Children speak names adults cannot trace." Ledger annotation, sensory memory reinforces patterns. Observation persists. Nodes synchronize. Even the landscape itself appears complicit. Hollows, ridges, and abandoned hollows correspond to ledger entries, creating a network of observation extending across valleys. Local folklore collected in 2020 recounts, some hollows do not allow birds. The wind seems to carry voices. Children know things adults cannot. The ledger confirms, patterns encoded in geography. Memory persists. Observation continues. Adults fail to interpret. Attempts to trace the girl's original lineage intersect with these modern nodes, yet remain incomplete. Birth records, census logs, and property deeds frequently contain gaps. Volunteers note that descendants of the original households often report uncanny memories, dreams of symbols, whispers of names, and recollections that predate their own births. One 2023 note reads, "I dreamt of 7 names. I knew them before anyone taught me. I can see the floor patterns in my mind. I do not remember learning them." Ledger annotation, memory flows through nodes. Children inherit knowledge adults cannot erase. Patterns endure. Even those outside Boone and Logan counties report subtle manifestations. Archival cross-references suggest isolated reports in adjacent hollows where children draw identical patterns, recite 7 unknown names, or reference Ashcroft and other ledger-linked surnames. A 2021 field note reads, 7 names repeated. Triangles drawn. Children correct each other. Adults unsure. Patterns echo Boone County records precisely. Ledger annotation, network extends beyond initial observation. Memory persists. Observation central. Adults powerless. The ledger itself concludes with repeated emphasis on the uncontainable nature of memory and ritual. Marginal notes stress that even extensive suppression, fires, and erasure cannot interrupt the system, memory centralized. Children act as nodes. Observation continues. Adults blind. Records incomplete. Patterns endure. Houses remember. Names persist. Geography encodes ritual. Archival photographs from the 1940s to the 2020s show the persistence of both structures and behaviors. The central house in Boone County remains standing, its walls marked with symbols and dust patterns. Floorboards bear traces of triangles, circles, and intersecting lines. Children trace names absent from official records. Even volunteers who avoid physical entry report subtle signs of activity. Objects displaced, dust patterns realigned, air thickened, echoes of whispered names. Ledger annotation. Structures endure. Memory persists. Observation continuous. Children central. Adults unable to erase. The ledger frames the ending as unresolved, open, and second person. Marginal entries emphasize that this system, children, houses, symbols, and names, is ongoing and that any observer may encounter it. If you enter the hollow, if you trace the floorboards, if you whisper Ashcroft aloud, you activate memory. Patterns respond. Observation continues. Adults fail. Memory persists. The ledger implies that Boone County itself remains a repository, a network of nodes, structures, and children, holding the knowledge adults tried to suppress. Even the simplest act of observation carries weight. Volunteers who report seeing symbols, hearing whispers, or witnessing unusual behavior often experience subtle alterations in memory. One 2022 field journal reads, "I saw the chalk triangles. I remember names I cannot explain. I cannot place them in time or lineage. I am uneasy. Patterns follow me home." Ledger annotation. Observers altered. Nodes expand. Memory persists. Adults powerless. The ledger closes this section, and by extension the documentary, with an emphatic statement of dread and continuity. We were not meant to know this. Names endure. Patterns persist. Children remember what adults cannot. Houses, dust, and hollows carry memory. Observation continues. Memory flows through nodes. Adults fail. Patterns endure. Boone County breathes quietly, recording what cannot be erased. Ashcroft remains central. The ledger continues.